Chicago in those days wasn't conservative, it was corrupt. A segregated, corrupt city run by, you know, some vicious people.
It was a real tight-ass Catholic kind of shove a piece of coal up your butt, you get a diamond kind of city.
It was a very closed-down city, very conservative, was not open.
There was something about the whole Chicago rock and roll crowd that just, you know, viewed punk as like a threat.
If you walk down the street with a mohawk, you were going to get all kinds of comments and you might get your ass kicked.
Back then they wanted to fight you. They just wanted to kick your ass, man. They felt threatened. They didn't like it or understand it.
Older people generally left you alone. It was your heavy metal, like loop t-shirt wearing types that really took a great hatred to punk rock.
And lots of guys with like center parts and you know, Led Zeppelin t-shirts and Trans Ams. Like I'd be waiting for the bus and somebody would whip a bottle at me or something.
You'd walk down the street, people would throw things at you, hurl insults, cars would slow down, people would yell. And
Oh, Devo. Yeah. One word, Devo.
Hey, Devo!
Punk rock, B-52.
Rock Lobster!
You'd be standing at the L platform, you know, and somebody would, like some guys would get off of the train and walk by you and they'd say, Devo!
Jocks or idiots, same deal, would lean out the window and say, whip it!
they'd yell like, whip it good. Remember Devo used to, that's what they thought punk was, you know?
That was like the put down of choice by like REO Speedwagon fans everywhere was Devo. And it was always pronounced in that sort of mildly retarded fashion.
I think on the north side I got more shit because people sort of knew a little bit or they'd seen it, so they knew to fuck with it. Whereas on the south side they were just like crazy white boys, whatever. South side was bewilderment, but north side was punk rock faggot. Hey, faggot.
Oh, we were faggots. I mean, of course we were faggots. We had to be. We had to be. We weren't playing the Who, you know? We had to be fags.
Fucking faggots, get off the stage. Got a lot of faggot.
But it was a lot safer to be downtown Chicago than it was.
Oh yeah, I'd way
growing
rather be
up
a
in
punk in
Illinois.
the city than out in the suburbs.
The suburbs were a very violent, treacherous place for young punk rockers like
Very
ourselves.
scary.
I think it's the Midwest mentality kind of thing.
People are conservative here. And
People are very conservative and, you know, go Bears.
But I always thought that would come like, you know, a bit, you know, that people who liked hard rock and heavy metal would, you know, probably like punk. Not in the late 70s, early 80s. They detested us with a passion.
I was managing a record store called Sounds Good at Belmont and Broadway. The guy who was my assistant manager was Mike Rivers, also known as Sparkle. We had gotten the first Ramones record. You know, the guy walks in, hey, I think you'll like this, Leather Jackets. While he's giving us the first Tom Petty record because he thought they were the same thing. I think we had gotten a couple Clash singles, Anarchy in the UK. We realized that there were all these people buying these records, and the conversation would go around, go, boy, I wish there was somewhere that you could hear this stuff. And Sparkle knew these guys, a couple of gay guys who had this club on Halstead, this club that wasn't doing anything, called La Mer Vipère. So we went over there, said, hey, can we have your club for a Sunday night? We'll provide the DJs, we'll provide the music, we'll provide the people at the door. You 10 bar and take all the money. And I think we charged $1. So the first night we had like 100 people who were just like, wow, this is great. You like this music too? Yeah. Some people had like white shirts that they, you know, and they put pins in, but it was more tongue-in-cheek. It was like a Halloween party.
It was at the time when people really didn't know how to become punk, when punk really wasn't codified.
There will be anarchy at La Mer next Sunday night.
We used to joke, it was, you know, all the misfits coming together.
It was like a fish finding water for me. I knew that I belonged. The music was awesome. The environment was awesome. This was it. I had found my element.
For the first time in my life, I was thrilled to be living in Chicago because of Lumiere Vapeur.
I mean, the place was jumping, and just all the outrageous characters from around Chicago who had no other scene that would possibly accept them. Some of these people were very hardcore, individuals.
We would go every night. Every night they would be playing some new song that got released. A lot of English punk. Great stuff. It's fantastic when every day you hear a new song that just kicks your ass more than the new song that kicked your ass yesterday.
May of '77, we went to England. I'd been playing the Pistols and the Clash a little bit before I left, but I had no idea what was going on there. I just got tons of records while I was there, and then I came back, and I had just happened to get like about 3 or 4 promo copies of Pretty Vacant. We went to Lumiere that night, and I brought him a copy of it. It hadn't even actually been released yet in England, so it made for a good party that night.
It wasn't only the punk thing, it was, they were playing reggae, you'd have soul in there, but it was just straight up hard energy dance music.
In the course of the night, you would hear ska and rockabilly and glam and the Ramones, and the movement hadn't fractured.
The disco leftovers were there, and they were discovering Lumiere, and I'm sure a lot of them never went back.
I was discoing, I was like wearing the suits like everybody else. Stopped at Lumiere, just on a fluke. I was like, bam, walked into place, the music was kicking, people were jumping, just going crazy. I went home, I took off that suit, man, I ripped up a t-shirt, and I was back the next night.
Kenny Ellis was the doorman there, and I opened the door and I go, dude, what is this place? And he goes, Lumiere Vapeur, man, mother of the snake. And I said, what is this music?
Punk. You either come in or don't,
And there were people that still had long hair. There were people that still had beards and you didn't have to shed everything right away.
You still had people with, their afros and mustaches. And you had people with who embraced it more fully. They were, fully safety pinned out and ripped t-shirts.
Just anything went. There was no uniform. It was brilliant.
You'd see people, they kind of heard about it. They'd walk in with a tie on. And by the end of the night, the tie's gone, the shirt's gone, the guy's in his undershirt, the girl's shoes are gone, her dress is all sweat up, and they're like, this is great. And you see them the next week, and now they don't have a tie on, they're a little punkier.
The clientele was made up of just such a diverse white people, black people, Asian people. It was the first place I'd ever stepped into, and it was 1977. That was just completely, utterly diverse, and nobody gave a crap about anything.
Art school kids, drag queens, gays, leather boys, poets who wore lederhosen and carried Barbie doll cases.
I used to do things like wear a dry cleaning bag.
We all just put on these heavy-duty plastic bags and chained ourselves together and insisted on being admitted into the club as one entity. We didn't want to pay cover for 4 guys. We wanted to pay 1 cover charge.
I just wanted to see what it looked like, and who was there and what they looked like. And I was just really curious.
In June, we had our Punkorama weekend, which had a fashion show.
I guess it was a fashion show. People wrapped in saran wrap or aluminum foil.
We had ear piercing by a registered nurse, of course.
And Time magazine showed up, and there's a picture of this guy Spin who wore a parachute with raw meat. The Dead Boys, I hung out with the Dead Boys drinking with them. The Stranglers came by a few times. Jimmy Scafish was a regular.
Scafish, the artist, was holding court at the bar with 2 of his little friends, and they were both wearing lederhosen.
The guy is he's different looking. Yeah. Plus, he was part of the royalty there.
Yeah, him and Beluga, they were the trendsetters as far as what they thought people should be wearing, which was usually way too cartoony even for now.
The Illinois legislature, in its infinite wisdom, decided to lower the drinking age from 21 to 19.
There was a lot of drinking, there was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of hallucinogenics at the time. A lot of people are on MDA.
And they had poppers there, and maybe somebody would snort a popper, and then you'd go downstairs and jump around for a while it was working.
Upstairs was a good place to nod out.
Tick was big then. You know, you get people all blasted on tick.
Bathroom was always good for doing coke, to wake up.
A lot of coke, a lot of uppers and downers and everything else, you know. I mean, I don't know what everybody else was doing. I know what I was doing.
There was just all kinds of shit going on in those bathrooms, you know, all the time. There's no privacy.
I mean, the bathrooms, you'd go in the men's room, there'd be transvestites putting on their makeup. It didn't matter.
Seeing people dancing naked did not surprise you, okay? And it would happen. And it would happen because people would come in wrapped in cellophane, and so they just didn't care right off the bat.
You know, it was sexual, it was dancing with yourself, it was dancing in groups, it was making out under these bleachers. It was truly anything goes.
You know, people fucking on the side of the room, underneath in the alcoves.
They kept these risers for when they ever did shows, but there was this whole space and there was this group of people that hung out under there. We called them the moles, you know?
Shit went on under there, man. That was one of the treats of working the floor because you had a flashlight, you know? And like you could like flash in there and go, yeah. You know?
And there was a few drag queens that took advantage of naive men who were drunk.
I mean, that was the end of the world there. Halstead, the 2200 block of Halstead was like close to the street gangs over there on Armitage and Halstead. It was a rough area over there, so the cops didn't really bother you over there that much until they saw that, you know, things were starting to get successful there.
Most of the cops that I dealt with, that coming to the door to like check IDs, to make sure we're checking IDs, they look around the place and you could see they just were like, hey, let's get the fuck out of here. You know, these motherfuckers are crazy. You know?
When it went to 7 nights a week, it snowballed into something that none of us expected, and I think towards the end, none of us really wanted.
The asshole factor went up dramatically.
But yeah, you started to see it become, you know, almost like the tour bus that would stop at the Baton so that the suburbanites can see the drag show. It was, you know, you get a car full and you go look at the freaks at Lemire.
The neighborhood hated it.
That neighborhood was in that process of gentrification that's overtaking the city still.
There were rumors going around that you know, men were urinating on women in there, and that, you know, there was active sex, multi-partners, and people were dancing and spitting on each other and puking on each other, and, you know, this kind of, you know, stuff that was so out of control. And then eventually one night, we were down at the Coach House, and I went out to my car to get something, and I saw fire trucks down the street, and I go, you know what? That looks really close to Lemire.
And there was fire trucks there and police cars, and they were all standing around outside on Halstead Street, and there was a little bitty fire going on in the top of the building, and they were all standing there and nobody was doing anything about it. And they were just standing there watching this fire go. And I saw this and I ran back to the party and I said, they're burning down Lemire. So a bunch of people ran over and then the cops wouldn't let us through. And, you know, the suspicion is that they actually set the fire to get rid of this place.
Oh yeah, it was definitely torched.
And that was the end of it. That was pretty much, that was the end of Lemire Viper.
Maybe it's a good thing that it burned down when it did. And at that time, I guess it was losing its luster.
It was easy for everyone to persecute and say, the neighborhood burned it down, neighbors burned it down, the police burned it down. Everyone had a speculation. You know, I have my own, but I prefer not to share that right now because it might ruin a lot of people's, like, you know, imaginations.
What always struck me and my friends funny at the first night that he was dedicating totally to soul, they burned it down. It's like, wait a minute, we'll put up with the punks, but now you're crossing the fucking line.
Tutu and the Pirates.
You got me!
They were probably the first Chicago punk band.
Sitting in your car making love.
Tutu was our drummer, but he wasn't Tutu. We just had that. We came up with the name first, And then we said, who's going to be Tutu? And I mean, I don't know why that name came, but I mean, we just all laughed and thought it was just so stupid, you know, and they said, that's got to be our name. And so we figured, who could handle having that name? And he was an ex-Marine and a biker and stuff, so he's the one guy who could handle having that as his name, because the rest of us weren't secure enough in our manhood to be able to have that name. I was Little Richie Speck, the bass player was Frankie Paradise, and the guitar players were Jimmy Sockett and Mel Torment. Really, our thing was kind of like sort of tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, our original concept was really raw and fast, and you know, you could, you know, jump up and down to it. We played at a place called, it was actually named after a Patti Smith song. It was a one-night-only place called the Piss Factory. It was a big warehouse basement somewhere, and everybody who hung out at Lemaire was there. And it was great. We came out and started playing, and people just went crazy. You know, none of us expected that. We knew we had some fun songs, you know, but people really wanted a local band that was really doing kind of the punk thing.
Tutu and the Pirates were absolutely fantastic. They were so over the top, so funny, so crazy.
And you know, when they do like, I want to be a janitor, he'd bring out his toilet seat bass. And the singer would have, Little Richie Speck, the singer, would have a plunger, you know. You know.
I want to be a janitor! College readings, what they want. Textbook study, brains the count. Critique and teaching is thinking strong. Which department are they from? I want to be a janitor.
Out of that early scene, they were the only band that they could play in the clubs where all the bands like Bohemia and those bands would play.
You know, places like Mothers and Huey's and Beginnings, and a lot of smaller, you know, little neighborhood bars and stuff like that. You know, we were like the token, they'd try it out. We used to open up the set, you fuckers, and then, you know, blam, 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 and then break into whatever, I got zits or something.
I got zits. I got zits. I got zits.
These people were just totally, you know, appalled that this, you know, and they were willing to kill people to stop this scourge on their beloved rock music scene.
The bands were always trying to look very studly and handsome, you know, and they're gonna get the girl and they're gonna sing love songs. This is really the exact opposite. You know, it looked like hell, it looked like bikers, it looked like trouble. The songs were rude. I mean, it was just wrong, you know, wrong. It was just wrong. From the get-go wrong. You know, it was not, you know, what they wanted to hear.
She always falls asleep. Ah, shit.
The one at Beginnings was hilarious because there was like they had Battle of the Bands night. You know, the bands that were playing with us were like doing like, you know, were like Styx, you know, kind of bands. And so we showed up with a huge contingency. You know, everybody came out to see us there. And it was a friggin' war. I mean, people were throwing beer bottles at us, and I got cut. Tutu got hit in the head with a bottle. I mean, you know, everybody was getting all dinged up. I mean, we were all bleeding and stuff, but I mean, it was the greatest show ever because it was like our friends were all getting pummeled, and they were pummeling other people, and of course, when we were done with the set, the owner beginning, you know, said, "Get the hell out of my club, you'll never play here again." We were back like 2 months later.
Contrary to popular belief in 77, 78, that period, there were no real quote-unquote punk bands, except for maybe Silver Abuse. And they wore tinfoil, and they were really obnoxious and really bad.
Bill, Santiago, my friend Bob and I formed a band called Silver Abuse.
You know, it's like everybody's listening to Peter Frampton, and everybody has to be, you know, virtuoso to be able to, you know, record and get on a label and get the records out. And the Ramones are, you know, doing these 3-chord songs. So it gave us hope.
We were totally incompetent.
Okay, our first show was the infamous Tutu's Placenta show. We got asked to play there. I think it was a benefit for the Gabba Gabba Gazette,
which was the local punk newspaper put out by Mary Alice Rammel, who was dating our bass player. We just had these parties where they were rent parties for our warehouse, and we'd sell beer there. And it was like the 4300 block of West Fullerton, which was no man's land over there.
We went, we played, a riot started.
People threw beer at us and shorted out the PA.
I think I still have a scar here from the full beer can that hit me.
Man, they really pushed some buttons there, you know. Their song titles alone, you know, just, I don't know if you want me to quote some of them. All right, All Jews Must Die.
Oh yeah, oh, I mean, it's interesting when people walk up to you and say, you know, I really want to kick your ass. Is there some reason why I should not kick your ass?
And you know, a good deal of the people who were in the scene were Jewish and black and gay, and they were putting, you know, I mean, I don't know that they were really racist, anti-Semitic guys. I just think that they wanted the shock value, and they really got it because people were just appalled. You know, people wanted to kill these guys, which was kind of stole some of our thunder because we were always the band people wanted to kill.
It was actually satirical at the time. The Nazis were marching in Skokie. So we had that song, and unfortunately the lyrics were not as intelligible as they could have been. So people actually took it seriously.
And the song was meant to be a parody of the American Nazis because basically these people were, you know, complete imbeciles.
Well, maybe the fact we were wearing World War II Nazi helmets didn't help.
We kept telling him, make it about something else. Kill somebody else, okay? Then he would get drunk and start singing it, you know.
But it was like one of those songs that ended up like haunting us, you know, for years and years and years, and having to explain to people, I'm not a Nazi. It was supposed to be a joke, okay? It wasn't a funny joke, I understand that now. Since we always believed in recycling, we kept the music for the song and changed the lyrics to Dogs Have Fun, which seemed to go over much better.
After that show, I thought, you know, I want to do more than just get drunk and play. So I said to Silver Abuse, I am no longer going to play with you. I'm going to see if I can start a band. After I left, the next gig also ended up in a riot. So the first 2 gigs involving these guys ended up in riots.
Slow and painful fun.
Chicago was kind of behind, you know. It was like LA and New York had their scenes. It took a while for Chicago to get with it, I think, you know. I mean, initially there were some bands, you know, like Tutu the Pirates. And then there was sort of a bar scene, kind of a new wave bar scene with, you know, bands like Bohemia and Fill in the Blanks, and which, you know, I mean, they were cool, but, you know, It wasn't the real thing.
It was like lame new wave before we even knew how lame it could get.
Because before then, you gotta remember this, it was Fill in the Blanks, Bohemia, Wasmo Neres, you know, just bullshit, just bad.
A whole slew of these, like what we used to call skinny tie bands, you know, bands from the burbs that were, okay, well, you know, we were playing the Beatles and Rolling Stones a month ago, but, you know, times are changing, so let's put on some skinny ties and start playing, you know, some power pop, you know.
Well, it was still the skinny ties and bell bottoms phase.
Their music wasn't really very aggressive or very loud. They weren't talking about destroying anything. They weren't talking about, you know, how ugly life was or any of those things.
We wanted like screeching and screaming and, you know, angst. And that didn't seem to have it at all, you know.
None of them could hold a candle to what we were hearing around the rest of the country. And so there was just kind of waiting. Is something ever going to happen here?
Because really at the beginning, there were very few records by Chicago bands. The first one that I can think of, well, like I said, the Mentally Ill single came out very, very early.
That Mentally Ill record is the best record ever. You can play that record to people today and you will still startle people with the crudity of that record. It's just unfathomable that somebody would make that record intentionally, but they did.
I think the noise we were just trying to make was something that would really get everybody pissed off who listened to it, and that really was our goal. And when we actually achieved that, I think we were pretty proud of it. Yeah, we were very pleased.
Well, first we just brought them into record stores. We'd sneak them in. It was like stealing, but
reverse.
But in reverse.
Yeah.
We sent them all over. We sent them to the White House.
Sent him to Gacy in prison, which we thought was a major victory, actually.
Yeah, we
called
were
Sick by John Wayne Gacy.
Almost all the other big music scene places in America had kind of like become more involved with itself and gotten bigger and done self-promotion and become cool. And in Chicago, the punk scene was sort of exclusively the territory of like genuine misfits.
California, New York bands always got a lot of press, and so people knew who they were, and they developed a greater following than Chicago bands. They had a media that was more willing to talk about them and cover them, and you know, here it was like pulling teeth.
There was the Illinois Entertainer, which besides being retarded, has a curse on it. So you don't want to be associated with the Illinois Entertainer. Going back 30 years, I think, if your picture appears on the cover of the Illinois Entertainer, you go into an immediate career tailspin. It's like an unavoidable curse. But there was The Coolest Retard, which was a great fanzine. It was like among the best fanzines ever, and it happened to come out of Chicago.
Craig was a really important person, started The Coolest Retard. It was just, it was another important thing that kind of kept our little scene going.
You could tell when reading the articles that whoever had written the article was really excited about whatever it was that they were writing about.
Craig and Terry would always be the two to interview, and then Terry Nelson had his radio show at WZRD at Northeastern.
Here it is! Sunday Morning Nightmare!
Terry Nelson, I think, is really one of the driving personalities in the Chicago punk scene. I mean, he put punk rock on the radio in Chicago as early as anybody else did, maybe the first. And he spent a lot of time going over to England, so he knew the bands, and when the bands came here, he would bring them over to the station and interview them. And the band started saying, hey, why don't you tape our concerts? You know, you can play them. And he found out I was into recording and stuff. So sometime thereafter, he said, hey, why don't you help me record this show?
I was one of the contact people for Chicago, so I would usually do an interview and we would record the show for whoever they brought through, which was an awful lot of bands. It was great.
This is Poeta
of the Jam, and you're listening to WZRD Chicago. Can you dig it?
I'm Captain Sensible. This is Sunday Morning Nightmare. Hey, how's my tip for the top?
This is Lux Interior here with your mother, listening to the Sunday Morning Nightmare Show.
It's Mick Jones of The Clash on WZRD, where they guarantee you will never hear Foreigner.
This was a very hastily arranged interview, and we've run into some problems with the security people here in the building. So the people from Black Flag are showing their identifications now, and we're going to...
By that time, Wax Trax had opened, and that was the mecca for punks in Chicago. That's where if you want to buy records, you went to Wax Trax.
I remember Steve and I walking down Lincoln Avenue maybe a month before they opened, and in '78, I want to say, and they'd already started putting out some of the bins, and they had a Suicide Commandos record in front of one of the bins. And one of the other bins was a Roxy Music and maybe the Saints or something, and it was kind of like, wow, well, if that's right at the front, you know, I mean, it's not stuck in the back like it is in every other record store we've been to in town, you know? You don't have to ask them to order it.
They were up to date. So if X-Ray Specs released a record, Wax Trax would have it in stock, you know, within the week.
Kids would drive in 2, 3, 4 hours to go to that store over the weekend to get stuff because they couldn't get anything.
Jim Nash and Danny were just so into new bands and new groups and really unbiased until they became part of that whole Front 242 problem. And they would just turn you on to so many great bands. You know, they would say, did you hear this? Did you hear this? I mean, every time you went in there, you know, you say, Jim, what's new? Oh, did you hear this? Play that. And you know, he would just blast it through the speakers.
And it was also a point where we could all go and see other people like us.
And there was a time that you could walk down the street and see somebody wear a leather jacket and know instantly you had some kind of rapport musically with this person.
Well, Chicago, if you dressed that way, you were into the music.
After Silver Abuse, the remaining members started a band called the Layouts,
which is a little bit more of a pop-oriented kind of band, you know, fast, short songs.
Our set was 26 songs in just a little over 30 minutes, so they were quick.
During that time was when I wrote this song called Surf Combat that had only 2 chords. And together with Naked Raygun, who also we shared rehearsal space with, we decided to throw a party and, you know, kind of premiere the bands. Actually, Naked Raygun at that time was called Negro Commando.
I was at the Exit one night, and I saw Marco Pizzotti playing pinball, and he had the look. He was just dressed to the nines as a punk. I asked him if he wanted to, you know, start a band, that I was, you know, looking to start a band. He said, yeah.
Which is weird because he didn't know anything about playing in a band. He bought a bass and he started playing bass with Santiago Durango. I used to go see him practice and they just totally sucked, you know. Like these bands I was in was like much more pro than them.
Jeff at the time was playing in a spandex heavy metal band out in the suburbs called Condor. And we went out to some suburban club to watch them. Jeff was wearing spandex and he had an afro, you know, out to here, but he could really sing, so we said, you know, so then we asked him if he wanted to sing.
What I really wanted to do was like sing for this shitty band that Santiago and my brother were in. But since Santiago came up to me one day at the bar at O'Banion and said, you know, you really need to like cut your hair.
You know, how could I not ask him to cut that? That was not punk.
Then I cut my hair and then I started singing for those guys and I quit that crappy ass suburban band I was in.
The Wayouts and Silver Abuse and Naked Raygun and Toothpaste at different times all had very similar lineups. and they would do a lot of the same songs. I think they all did Bomb Shelter.
It took a while for it to really, finally gel and become Naked Raygun. It was sort of like an organism evolving and trying this out to see if it works, and it doesn't, and if it doesn't, then, you know, out you go.
The early Naked Raygun was wet. They were more bizarre, freaky. They were very visual, almost avant-garde.
Every now and again, you'd think that you were looking at a rockabilly band because they would have these sort of goofy rockabilly hips and hoes and haze. And then sometimes you'd think you were listening to like a retarded art project just because it would be all beeps and squiggles and mumbling.
I love you, I really love you, I love you.
And then sometimes it was just sounded like heavy metal. At any rate, Naked Raygun blew my mind. They were the weirdest band, best band I'd ever seen.
You know, we went through some drummers, and I think eventually Jim Kaleo, really became our drummer.
You know, Jim Kaleo is a great, great drummer. He probably had the best rhythm of any drummer I've ever drummed with ever. He has more rhythm than any white man I've ever met. It's unbelievable timing and sense of rhythm, really over the top.
They had this crazy jungle robot drumming, sort of a manic, compulsive drumming.
I think he just has rhythms going in his head like 24 hours a day.
At the end of his run with Raygun, he was actually really annoying because of that. I mean, it would be just like over the top, annoying with rhythm. Like, you know, just too much, just back off, dude.
I still don't even know how to pigeonhole them. I mean, I don't even know what you'd call Naked Raygun, like Italian art, surf punk, anthem punk, or so. I don't know.
One thing that we did want to do was we wanted to be original. We did not want to sound like somebody else. We wanted to forge our own sound. In fact, we wanted to forge a Chicago sound.
Prior to that whole scene evolving, a band playing original music could not exist in Chicago. If you didn't play 90% covers, and that was what was on the radio at the time, or oldies, you couldn't play.
Clubs would not allow kids with original music to play with their own material. It was cover bands or nothing.
And suddenly, you know, we're renting lofts and putting on shows, you know, down in the Fulton Market, and we're having great shows. 5 and 6 bands, white light, you know, selling our beer on our own, you know, and that's how we had live music. And then pretty soon the clubs were finding out that we were making more money than they were. So places like Gazebo, believe it or not, on Lincoln Avenue starts having punk rock bands, you know. Mother starts having punk night on Mondays.
People started opening up clubs all over the place. Everything, all of a sudden it was like, punk this, new wave that, it was all over. And this guy, who was gay, opened up this club called Anarchies. He had gotten the money from the mob to open up this club, and he owed them a lot of money, and he couldn't pay them, and they were unhappy about that.
It had a kind of a strange ending to the club because they found the guy dead in his club with a mic stand stuck up his ass.
Which I actually think is kind of overkill, but I guess the mob is not really known for subtlety.
Shortly after Lemaire had burned, like the next big thing that hit town was like this Patti Smith concert. You had all these like crying punks in the audience, Patti, they burned Lemaire, Patti, they... And she said, build another one, and I said, yeah, build another one.
O'Banion's came about because Nancy Rapchak, who was a DJ at O'Banion's for years, and she came to us at the record store and said, hey, are you guys still looking for a place to do that punk rock? And we said, yeah, why? You should go talk to this guy Russell at this bar O'Banion's. He's been doing, if he has 3 people in the bar on any night, he's jammed. Nancy set up a meeting, we went and talked to this guy. I mean, he was like sort of a leather guy, the leather and bondage guy, but we sat down and talked to him, and we told him. We guaranteed him people if he would give us a night or 2 nights. The DJ staff that was at Lemaire became the DJ staff at O'Banion's.
The scene was a little bit different at O'Banion's. It was a little rougher because of the neighborhood with all the leather boys and stuff.
People would still come to the bar who were, lesbians or flamingly gay and wanted to show that kind of side of themselves, and or else maybe like into S&M and were dressed more like that, and somehow punk rock all mixed together. It made it for a very lively atmosphere.
It was totally different than Lemaire. The music changed, the atmosphere changed, and it wasn't that first wave of punks anymore. It was different people.
O'Banion's became more violent than Lemaire ever was.
So I have a scar right here from O'Banion's. I got jumped on.
That's one of the reasons I kind of quit there. It was like, hey, this dude's paying me like $8 an hour to maybe get an ass whooping. It ain't worth it.
Do I feel good about working there for like 2.5 years, and in 2.5 years being in probably 375 fights? Nobody has 375 fights in 18 lifetimes.
And I know there were some fights and this and that, but overall, it was a dance party.
We probably ranked as the worst, quote, new wave punk bands I'd ever heard, up until the Oz bands. I owned a bar that was called the Greenleaf up in Rogers Park. I had a pretty good business just as a neighborhood gay bar. And it wasn't until after Lemaire burned, and I would say probably the day after, that I said, okay, we're changing the bar. And there was a lot of anger toward me in the gay community that I would take a gay bar and turn it into a punk bar. As a gay bar, the neighbors were just brutal. They did not want a gay bar in their neighborhood. When we turned it punk, well, at first the neighbors didn't know it. And I remember the first time they came into Fag Bash and got the shit knocked out of them by a bunch of punks. And it just, you would think that now they're gonna leave us alone, that what they did was the police harassment became just intolerable. In the course of all the Oz's, I went to jail 20 times in 18 months. And so we knew we had to make a move. And I had set up a new space for Oz down on Hubbard Street. It was a place that was called The Ranch. It was definitely connected with Outfit and all.
It was basically a kind of a geriatric gay leather bar. And it was very interesting because, the old duffers that, be hanging out there were absolutely delighted to see all these, young boys in like leather jackets and, ripped t-shirts.
Oz was a dump on Hubbard.
It was creepy. You walk around and you're like, oh man, this is like Scaryville down here. And we're actually gonna go in here and play music. It's like, it was just so in with the punk thing in my mind, how it should be.
That's when we started to really have a scene, I think.
Strike Under was a hard band, the first Chicago band that was a hard punk band.
1, 2, 3, 4.
They were the main band to me, but that's me. I'm not the only one that feels that way, but.
They were fabulous. They were incredible. They were the best band.
I thought this is the first time I'd actually seen someone who was kind of dangerous sounding. Just because they were loud and abrasive, and there wasn't an air of new waviness to them at all.
They opened the door. They were the first hard band in Chicago, the first punk band. You go, yeah, this is fucking punk, this is cool. They weren't artsy at all.
You know, you hear them and it's like, you know, why even bother? These kids are so much better than we are. You know, let's just hang it up, you know. But on the other hand, it's like exciting because it's like, shit, yes, there's some other great bands that are here with us.
Just at that time, people were really happy to see some really exciting music start in Chicago.
For a while, Oz became our hangout. What we'd do is Thursday nights we'd have practice, and we'd head over to Oz, you know. And so it was only fitting that Oz was to be our first gig. And that was our first gig in like November of 1980.
First time I saw the Effigies probably was at Oz, and I thought they were scary, scary good. They were so good. I was like, damn, now we got to get better because these guys are gonna blow us off stage. First of all, we can never play with these guys. They're too good.
I'm like, this is just so great. This is what music should sound like.
Quarter of the way through their first song, which is, I still remember, it was Below the Drop, the first song I ever saw them play live. Bombs just went off in my head.
Just, it blew everybody away. Everybody was like, oh, wow.
I mean, it was incredible. They scared me. They were so great.
Nobody I know could deliver a song standing still with such intensity and anger or whatever it was that drove him.
They had Earl, you know, who was fresh from heavy metal bands, and he could really, really play. word spread quickly that there was these two powerful new bands, and Naked Raygun was right there with us too.
I thought that we were the only punks. So it was like these different tribes had come up independently, and eventually we all became aware of each other.
And the last place I think I'm ever really going to have a hassle doing a punk bar is surrounded by all these gay bars, and I know all the owners of these gay bars, that and we've known each other for years. Was I wrong? They did not want a punk bar. That I used to tell them, it pisses you off because the leather looks so much better on my kids than your kids.
At the time, the gay community in Chicago was getting hammered pretty hard by the cops, and the cops hated the punks even more than the gay folks. And part of it was a number of the Chicago punks started wearing Chicago cop jackets. They wouldn't leave the Chicago police tag on, but they would leave the Chicago flag on there. It was like Chicago punks. And the cops, whenever they saw a punk wearing an ex-cop leather jacket, it seemed like that would set them off.
Then we went up to 3714 on Broadway, which was unfortunately about 2 blocks from the police station there. Not a good call.
And that became the Oz. When people say Oz, that's the one they talk about.
We opened the doors, I think, around 10, 11 at night. And we kept it going till about 7 in the morning. And it was bring your own.
He pretty much put his liquor license and probably even his freedom on the line to let us play at Oz. With a 21-year-old drinking age, we were all clearly not even close.
It became our home by necessity because nobody else would book us.
We saw Oz and went, oh wow.
What a dive. I mean, you had your typical, punk in the corner throwing up, the other guy, getting a blowjob in the other corner, and the other guy punching out his girlfriend in the other corner. It was nuts.
There was some violent things happening there, but there's been violent stuff happening in rock and roll forever.
I mean, girl fights and guy fights and...
Especially girl fights.
Oh, Jesus. Some of those Southside women were... And I know a few of them now.
I had problems in the bar. Our people, we just solved it. And sometimes it wasn't great. I remember, one night, one of the neo-Nazis was, I didn't want him in there, and we ended up putting him through the front plate glass, which was kind of nice, because then it allowed me to board up the rest of the club so you couldn't see in at all.
At the time, there was a guy who was friends with Terry Nelson named George Kapolis, and they started a record label called Autumn Records. And their first release was the girl band Da.
Two really stellar records, really good 7-inch single, and an excellent EP called Time Will Be Kind. They were, I think, a really brave group. They always did what they wanted to do. They never felt the need to change because of outside influences.
Well, they were a strange band. They sort of, well, for one thing, they didn't have an audience. Because the bar scene, the Bohemia and that scene, they said, those guys they're like punk. They were always with all those punk bands. And the punks went like, those guys ain't punk, So they kind of lived in this like netherworld.
3 months, no hassles, no cops, no bust. I can't believe it, that this feels so good. The day I got my liquor license, they raided my club and arrested me.
Jane Byrne was the mayor of Chicago, and she was starting to come down on some stuff that had been going on for a while, so that the Oz was getting hassled on a regular basis by the cops.
That's about the time the Huntington Beach thing is exploding with Black Flag and, and germs and circle jerks and all of that. And there's a lot of being written, in newspapers about this huge hardcore scene. My understanding is that Mayor Jane Byrne had the police call LA and said, we have a potential problem here with this club going that route. And the advice was, stop them now.
This is the music to the soundtrack of the album, of the movie, of the stage show, of the Oz album.
The Busted at Oz album, I think, helped to get some national recognition for Chicago.
2 bands playing every night. The bands would play between midnight and 6 a.m. And Tim Powell had a sound truck out in the street, and we're hoping the cops wouldn't see the wires, and no one could leave until it was over. And we just thought, can we get through 3 days without being busted? And we did.
Jeff Pizzotti from Naked Raygun provided the PA gear, such as it was, and I had my original truck there, known as the Vomit Comet. So it was Naked Raygun, the Effigies, Strike Under, Da, Silver Abuse, and the Subverts.
Subverts were just an amazing band. In fact, the Busted at Oz album, Subverts steal that album.
People haven't lost their heart. Nobody even knows where to start. State of the union, the state of confusion. Standard of living, just an illusion. Government affairs, too much bureaucracy. In the legislature, it's an emergency. Nobody knows just who to believe. All I ever do is try to teach you see. Always gotta have something up their sleeve. State of the union, the state of emergency. Gotta do something, can't you see? Boys, all the people are it's an emergency. That's where they're dangerous to. Tell me you're gonna do. The pictures on the menu. That's now. Don't wait until tomorrow, when it'll be too late. Don't need the future. Of your friends and fate. Look at the country is falling apart. Cause all the people haven't lost their heart. Nobody even knows where to start. State of the union, the state of confusion. Standard of living, just an illusion. Government affairs, too much bureaucracy. Emergency, just emergency. Now look at the country that's falling apart. Cause all the people haven't lost their heart. Nobody even knows where to start. State of the union, the state of emergency. Gotta do something, can't you see? Boys, all the people are emergency, it's an urgency.
Yeah, the Naked Raygun stuff and Busted It Out stinks. A lot of bands sound much better than we do. I'm telling you, back then we weren't that good. We had a good attitude and stuff and looked cool. That was about it.
Living life as you like it, and I've had it. Must the end of this suburban ballad. First you call my good routines embedded. Then some fun, never did a thing, now I regret it.
last night we were recording, the cops came in and they were going to shut the joint down. Dem got up on the mic and he said, well, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is this will probably be the last night we're open. We're going to get closed tonight. The good news is somebody got shot down the street and their cops are going to be tied up with that for a couple hours, so we have time to get this last set in.
The idea that someone had spray painted closed for being punk, it wasn't closed for being punk. It was closed because they were serving alcohol to people that were not of age. And they weren't, greasing the wheels, I mean, if you live in reality land, that's part of reality.
We just call them the Oz bands, but it was unfair to call them hardcore bands. I guess they kind of got lumped into that as well, but the Oz bands. And the first of our bands to get a record out was Strike Under on Wax Trax.
Jim Nash came to one of our gigs in January of 1981 and said, I want to do a record with these guys. Bob Furum's roommate was a guy named Tim Powell.
Let us into the studio he was working at after hours and recorded us essentially for nothing, just because he thought it was cool.
So we recorded this 5-song EP called Immediate Action by Strike Under, and that became Wax Trax 001. It was the first Wax Trax release.
Label mates with Divine at the time, Born to be Cheap. I think that was 002.
Chris and I hand silk screened all the album covers, which was way too much work.
It started this trend of Chicago punk bands recording 12-inch records at 45 RPM, like disco singles, but they were EPs. I think that's the best one of all. I just love that record.
That's a great record, and they weren't around for very long. It's almost like the tensions in the band sort of pulled it apart too quickly.
Right leg rolls, so the headstones a day long ahead.
So there was a lot of inner turmoil with Strike Under.
Yeah, well, the two brothers, Chris and Steve Bjorklund, were always fighting, always fighting.
They had some nights that were just genius and played all their songs brilliantly, and some nights Chris and Steve just got into fist fights on stage and never finished the set. I remember at Waves, they got in this fist fight in the dressing room and trashed the whole place and got kicked out, and they could never come back forever.
Steve just lost it, like walked off the stage, like picked up a pinball machine, slammed it down, broke the glass on it, and then like left the club.
I mean, the Oz thing was the greatest. They had some tremendous explosion before they went on stage. And when they went on stage, I think they would like to kill each other. There were just like sparks flying through the air. There's that instrumental that's on the Oz album. It was so hot.
These guys would always play two guitars and they'd never beat, and they'd sit there and bicker on stage. And people thought it was like a gimmick, like it was an act or something, but it wasn't.
You're out of tune. No, you're out of tune. No, you're out of tune.
We're exactly in tune tonight.
I read something that Husker Du came back to Minneapolis and said they had seen us at a show. And their report was, there's this skinhead band called Strike Under, and when the brothers go out of tune, they punch each other. And, that wasn't exactly the way it was, but,
I don't think we ever duked it out. I think we certainly had our arguments. I don't think any punches were ever thrown.
I think there were punches thrown. There was a show they did down at, I think it was the UIC, University of Illinois, Chicago. I think there were punches at that show. It was like maybe the second to last show they did.
Again, that might have been part of our reputation that got blown up a little bit more than it was. I mean, maybe we shouted at each other a couple of times on stage and, you know, accentuating the negative.
They can't downplay it. I was there, I saw that stuff. They hated each other, but they were brothers.
That friction must have caused them to really write some great material. It's just, unfortunately, that also caused them to, you know, split ways.
George and Terry approached the Effigies and said, hey, let's make a record. So we brought them out to Sound Impressions to make Haunted Town.
You know, I think the Effigies sort of, in a way, they kind of pioneered a new sort of punk, you know, like a metal punk that maybe hadn't existed really quite like that, you know.
It was just a cut above everybody else's stuff at that point in time, with better lyrics, better musicianship, and the songs were heavy, as heavy could get for back then.
It was definitely heavy.
They say that the big guitar sound of Chicago. Well, it was that record, not some Steve Albini record. Steve.
Haunted Town, Queer the Machine, and Body Bag are three of probably the greatest standout pieces of vinyl to come out of Chicago. I mean, they made you want to do something.
We had these reviews, these guys would say, this album is misguided patriotism, because these knuckleheads saw the flag on the front and said, you know, this is the American flag. It's not, it's Chicago. This is what we are, you know. Suburbanite or not, we understand Chicago. We know what it's about, you know. And that was Haunted Town.
Living in a haunted town, a haunted town.
I was doing shows for WXRT at that time and working out at the studio in Des Plaines, and I got a phone call one day from somebody, and they said, somebody from the Donahue show's on the phone. I said, oh, I'll take it. Well, we're gonna do an episode on the Donahue show about punk. I'm like, cool. She goes, we need some punks on the show. Well, they have to look weird. They have to be weird and freaky. I'm like, well, if you want a freak show, I'm not sure if these people are going to be into it. You know, well, they have to look weird. And obviously she was just doing the classic setup, you know, where you put the weird, freaky people on, and then they get hammered by all the suburban moms in the audience.
I mean, stand up just a second. I'm sorry.
My children, but I don't want one that's got purple hair standing up, or I've got a daughter that might be on drugs. I'd rather see her on drugs than that. I'd rather see her.
The anti-punk lady was saying these kids are into drugs, they're into self-mutilation, they're into violence, they slam dance and get cut up.
Apparently you put this on your...
On the wrist.
On the wrist,
Yeah.
and then as you dance, you
slam.
It's slam dancing. And the idea is to what? To injure the other person, or?
Yeah. No. All right.
All right.
You just go out and you have fun. Like if somebody falls on the floor, you know, they could get trampled or something, but everybody will always help you up, you know. Nobody will let you get down there and get your head smashed. Nobody's out to beat anybody's head in.
Okay, but I don't understand the hurt part of it.
It's like football.
I've seen a lot more people hurt in a high school or college football game than any night or any month of anybody dancing anywhere.
And the Chicago punks were trying to get the point across that the way it was in California with a bunch of disaffected, snotty, rich suburban kids, and in Chicago it was mostly just street level, you know, hard-working folks who were punks. It wasn't that. They truly tried to make that distinction on the show, which completely went over the heads of everybody in the audience.
How do you feel about the future, your future?
That's pretty ambiguous.
Yeah. You don't care? Not really. He's a what? Why is he a moron?
He's just a silly guy. I mean, he's got a dumb haircut. I mean, see, the thing about it is, if you can be a punk rocker or you can be a silly fool, you know, you can make yourself, you know, like they're talking about cutting yourself up or taking a lot of drugs or anything like that. And you can do that kind of stuff, and you can have a stupid purple haircut or anything like that, or you can listen to music that says something about evil stuff, you know. Yeah. And you can still have class. You can still be a regular person and listen to that kind of music. You don't have to be that silly.
I agree. Why shouldn't you then encourage me to get the kids back together again with their parents?
You're not trying to get them back together with their parents. You're trying to get them to be just like their parents.
How do you know that?
No. Yeah.
I wonder if these people would fight for our country if a war broke out.
No. How do you feel about that?
I think that they stink then.
People thought that we wanted to bring down the world, destroy the world. We were like the most dangerous thing. And now that I'm older, I wish that we would have allowed them to believe that. I wish we would have scared the hell out of them.
So in DeKalb, I had formed this band called Direct Drive with Joe Scuderi, who ended up in AOF, and two other guys. We're doing everything from Blondie to Bruce Springsteen covers. You know, and there's a couple of songs that we're throwing in that we've written ourselves, but they sound very Clash derivative. And so when Direct Drive comes to Chicago and we start playing shows, I think we're a very derivative band. We don't have a very unique sound. We're not a very good band.
Kind of a cross between the Clash and the Who or something. It was very rockish.
Well, because of Vic, it was a cross between Bruce Springsteen and something.
I remember thinking that they seemed kind of like punk rock Bruce Springsteen.
Parents lived in the Washington, D.C. area, and so at Christmas time I'd fly home and see my folks, and my sister got involved in the D.C. punk scene. And so she was saying, well, come down and see the Bad Brains. The Bad Brains were like the same feeling that I had at the Clash show. I mean, just being completely floored. I went back to Chicago and I said to the guys, we're doing this wrong. We're trying to copy bands. Let's find something that nobody else in Chicago is doing and let's make it our own. Now, most of the bands in Chicago at that time were playing pretty mid-tempo punk rock, you know. It's a 4/4, boom, and we just said, let's play fast. Let's be if nothing else, we can be the fastest band in this city. And probably within 3 months we were, without a doubt. This notion of a hardcore, of music that was so unmusical you could barely tolerate it, hadn't yet come into being. What I saw in DC were the Bad Brains, Faith, Minor Threat, bands that were playing music that you couldn't dance to. It's like bebop to jazz, right? You couldn't dance to it anymore. It was almost conceptual art. And then we did What We Want Is Free, early '82, out in Schaumburg. And then we put that out ourselves. So by that point, we had really crystallized a pretty aggressive sound.
You know, they were doing stuff that other bands weren't doing, like some kind of strange time signatures. Vic would sometimes play with an acoustic guitar, and that was like, oh my God, what the hell's he doing up there with an acoustic guitar, you know?
There were people in the AOF camp that hated the Effigies, and there were people that were in the Effigies camp that hated AOF.
It's like our crowds never really overlapped, you know? I mean, in my mind at least, Articles of Faith fans really weren't Effigies fans.
Those AOF guys were much more like me, like politically, but I still always thought that the Effigies were the greatest.
Haunted Town still stands up along any fucking record, but they were just fucking crabby and shit. And all they would go out of town, they just talk shit about everybody in Chicago in interviews, so everybody's like, fuck you.
Because we were touring the country and they were touring the country too. We go into these other towns, Boston or New York or something, and we'd see a local fanzine, we'd see them just ragging on us, just bad rapping us. I'll tell you the truth, I was really hurt at first. I mean, I liked the Effigies, I wanted to be part of their world, but they didn't want me part of their world, whatever, you know, whatever.
I like Vic Bondi. Vic Bondi's a smart guy. He's a good guy. He's a good musician. I was never a big fan of Articles of Faith. They went in, to me, they were in the category of like kind of the Dead Kennedy maximum rock and roll bands. And I never really liked all those bands. I thought they were talking very condescendingly on a certain level.
The Effigies used to get really intense about how AOF subverted them, and AOF turned everybody against the Effigies. I wouldn't doubt that they're still telling that story today, how AOF turned the city against the Effigies. We didn't turn anybody against anybody.
Vic Bondi had a big mouth, and he like trumped up this feud with the Effigies, calling them Nazis. Of course, they were like really pushing left-wing communism. I mean, you couldn't talk to the guy without him spouting, you know, Stalin quotes or whatever at you. He was an instigator. He was always trying to throw gas on the fire. I think he liked the controversy because it brought his band more into the spotlight.
I was at Tuts the night that Kedsey started spouting his right-wing bullshit from stage, and people literally sat on their hands at that show, right? And they had to stop the show.
It's just kind of ridiculous. I mean, to have some kind of stage-in, sit-down strike because the Effigies won't do this or the Effigies do... I mean, look, we're a band. Come see us if you like us. Stay home if you don't. Who cares?
And John Kedsey like fucking took me aside one time, like fucking 14, and takes me aside at Tuts and is yelling at me, telling me that I think I'm hot shit and I'm not, you know, he's not from the fucking suburbs. I'm not some spoiled, rich suburban kid to me, and going, I'm not gonna be you're gonna go up to be a doctor and a lawyer. This is what I do, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, first of all, I'm like 14, and you're like 30, and you're like bald, and you're yelling at me, like, you know what I mean? I felt like I was in school, like I felt like I missed a class, and so I'm getting screamed at by this old guy with bad breath, and he's like yelling at me, and I was like, oh, and I'm like, and then as a joke, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, I live at Belmont and Pulaski, man. Like, I don't live in the suburbs in a fucking apartment, you know what I mean? And my family lives in like, you are a lawyer. Like, you know, I was just like, I'm a bartender, bro. You won, okay?
They both have loudmouth singers, so I think that's probably the problem. Guys that like to talk, you know.
If it was just the Effigies scene and there was never an AOF, scene would have died in '83 or '84 when they stopped playing the punk. Because if you went through the Effigies world, you had to have a demo tape and you had to play a professional club that advertised in the paper. I don't think that's what they wanted as a band. That's just the way that scene worked. And with Articles of Faith, it was just like, you have a band? We'll find a place to fit you in. Come on down.
I was the bass player in Government Issue before I came to Chicago. I started jamming with Eric and Wes pretty soon thereafter. Dave immediately volunteered, and then really that's when the band took off, because, you know, Dave was like the best musician amongst the bunch of us, really.
They wrote cool, interesting stuff that didn't sound like it was influenced from Chicago.
Since I'd already been in the hardcore scene, like even before I came to Chicago, some of us were already joking about Formula Core, you know?
Savages came from a little bit of a 60s root and could still crank it up when they needed to, and they were probably one of the more fun bands to slam to.
Pat and Vic, those two were the ones who did Wasteland Records and paid for us to get a record out.
Pat and AOF did all the hall shows, you know what I mean? That was all they're doing.
Minor Threat played here, the Big Boys played here, and it was all because of them.
All we did was all ages shows. I mean, one of the problems AOF had was we couldn't get billings. in overage clubs. So again, we just said, fuck it, we'll put on our own shows.
And they befriended a lot of younger bands that were just starting at the time. They gave bands rehearsal spaces, they set up gigs for other bands that came through town. There was the Central American Social Club, and all of that was culturally good, but the band itself, I couldn't stand.
Somebody introduced me to him. This is Steve Albini. I'm like, oh, I love the stuff you read about Matter. And he says, well, I wish I could say the same about your band. I said, excuse me? He says, well, you know, you and the bass player are okay, but that guitar player that looks like Santana, he's got to go. You know, and how am I going to respond to that, right? I mean, Joe's my bro. He does look like Santana, but he's my bro, you know?
They were sort of embodied by these two elements. They're sort of excellent musician frat band past, which was embodied in their drummer, a totally like gifted drummer who, you know, obviously liked Stuart Copeland, kind of like that kind of drummer, right? And their lead guitar player, who had obviously been playing guitar his whole life and was, you know, into the solo, you know, like excellent musicians, the kind we all hated. Their frontman, Vic Bondi, who was like sort of typical shouting, yammering, loudmouth, you know, check my correct politics type hardcore frontman, you know. Absolutely nothing about that band appealed to me. And I thought that their audience was stupid, and I thought that they were making these broad stroke gestures of compliance is the way I looked at it. Like, okay, now we gotta play fast. We're gonna play fast. Like, we gotta have this radical political element. Okay, we got this radical political element, you know. All right, I'm not gonna sing anymore. I'm just gonna stammer and shout and, you know, hold the mic like a baseball and spit, you know.
When he pulls that stuff of, you know, bad rapping us, and then he comes to the Central American Social Club and hands out flyers for his fucking show. And I come up to him and I grab him by the collar and I'm like, get the fuck out of here. And he gives me this crying, little crybaby shit. You know, stand up. Stand up. You want to be a man? Stand the fuck up. Don't fucking cry about it. I mean, all my life, I wish I just whipped his ass that night. I still do. I mean, Steve, if you're out there, bro, I'm ready to go many rounds with you, my friend. I don't think it would last very long if you're still 75 goddamn pounds.
Like everything, it seemed like a big deal at the time, but I really could give a shit now, you know.
I did a lot of shows at CODs, and I did a lot of shows with the Dead Kennedys. I did, you know, shows and tours with the Damned, with the Dickies, with Public Image at the Granada. Tony was the person that was sort of running the show then. He was a con man. He would find owners of these clubs, and he would convince them that he should manage it. And he would skim as much as he could off the top, and he would run his scam for as long as he could. He also had a scam where, you know, he would know these people, kind of the patrons, over a certain amount of time, and he would always find somebody that he would sell the bar to. This was like right before he was going to get fired. And the owner finally figured out that he was being ripped off, and, you know, fired Tony. And Tony would always find somebody that he would convince that he, you know, that you should. He want to buy the club because I'm the owner, and it would just be a cash thing. You give me the money, and then the club is yours. But on the upside, Tony knew that I could put on shows. I had connections. I had been fighting to get the Dead Kennedys to come to Chicago. I had heard their first record to come out, and I thought it was so great, and I desperately wanted the Dead Kennedys to come to Chicago. I wanted to do the show. I wanted to be all ages, and yeah, we're going to serve beer. We're going to do it. We're going to serve drinks, and we're going to serve beer. You know, I knew somebody who gave the cops some cashola. They looked the other way, and at the same time, we were very careful and made sure that there were no problems, you know, and there weren't. And I tell you, the kids that got in those shows, I mean, they thanked me and thanked me and thanked me, and oh, it's so great, it's so great. You know, it's hard when you really want to go to those shows and you're not the right age, you know.
It seemed to me like January, February of '82 was when the underage scene really started to pick up, because there was a bunch of clubs around town that were doing all ages shows, which to this day I don't understand why, because they weren't money makers. And there would be 35 to 50 people at any of these clubs.
And I think bands from out of town were really surprised that they had to play 2 sets, because I didn't find out until later that didn't exist anyplace else. You could have kids come to the show if you had an underset and then an overset.
At first, I think the older crowd might have been a little confused by the young kids kind of just being little brats. And I think we went out of our way to be little shits, making fun of the old people who were 21, 22 at the time.
Most of the old guys wouldn't even come to the underage shows. They'd just wait till the older shows, the old guy shows, the old man shows, we called them. And all the kids would come to the underage shows. And the underage shows were always a whole lot more fun because you had all the kids out there.
A lot more energy, a lot crazier. The old guy show, no one would ever dance, no one would stay.
You just stand there and drink your beer, and it was very boring.
It was the old school versus the new school. You know, retrospectively, it was really stupid.
I think the new kids may have been sort of a stylistic difference between the older punk bands, and it was starting to turn hardcore, which was really just a lot faster, a lot more about speed and hormones than any sort of art.
It was just a totally different atmosphere, totally different energy, a lot more aggressive, a lot faster, a lot just aggressive overall.
The Chicago take on slam dancing wasn't really slam dancing, it was more the Huntington Beach strut.
I tried to emulate the HB strut, but I got the timing all off and I would just hit myself in the chest. The whole idea of slam dancing is to pound the other person, but I pounded myself instead. I never quite figured it out.
There was sort of a straight edge scene here at the time, but I know for me it was because I just never drank. Anyway, I had never tried drinking, and it just seemed to be something to kind of rub in the noses of everyone else that we were young and different.
I know I keep on saying we were really obnoxious, but it really, that's so much of what I remember, how totally annoyed the older people must have been by us.
So just be yourself, just be yourself, just be yourself, okay?
Well, there were definitely older bands that were willing to help us out and give us shows. Articles of Faith and Naked Raygun were really big supporters of the younger kids.
Yeah, we played one of the first all-ages shows that I can remember, and it was at Exit, and 2 people came, Anthony Alardi and Mike from Rights to the Accused. 2 people.
These guys were kids. They were like raw, like 14 years old when their moms first started dropping them off to back us up.
We were coming from that whole punk aesthetic that, you know, you really didn't have to know what you were doing at all. As long as you could figure out how to play a show, that was good enough.
Rights of the Accused were really a funny band. They were sort of like the cultural equivalent of the Beastie Boys for Chicago. Like they took nothing seriously and everything was a gag.
Saving grace was their humor, and that's one thing that I think was sorely lacking from hardcore.
Man, Rights of the Accused, I've never seen a group of guys that young have such command over an audience.
Rights of the Accused, that sounds like Mean People Suck. They had their tongue firmly in cheek, and the rest of the hardcore bands didn't.
Well, they were a funny punk band. You couldn't take them seriously. They were like, you know, they wanted to be Motley Crue. There's nothing wrong with that. That was fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you couldn't take them seriously.
Right, well, because everybody else was so fucking serious and creative. I mean, if everybody's playing the same fucking 3 fucking crappy ass chords fast. I mean, like, what difference does it fucking make? You know, I'm gonna get up on stage and be really serious. Like, you know, what's my art? Yeah, well, we weren't trying to be Kate fucking Bush. Ow.
There was a couple of bands our age. There was Negative Element. There was End Result. That might have been it at the time, actually.
Wax Trax was the central point, and that's where, you know, everyone would go to pick up their cool records and everything, and that's where Steve, our brother, hooked up with Rights of the Accused. He found an ad that he answered.
The only guy who answered the ad.
During that time, I was in a Southern Boogie band.
And then we got the Steppies, and then we found this whole little clan of, you know, these guys from the far suburbs who were, you know, really bizarre and great and creative.
The first time I met them, they all worked in this fucking donut shop, and Steve was the manager, and Barry and Chopper both worked there. Good idea. And they were always like hacking and sneezing and coughing, spitting in the fucking donut mix and shit. But the first time I met them, they were all excited because they made a donut hole out of a golf ball. For giving it to a cop, man. Cops get a fucking donut hole. Remember Steve put his foot down when he caught Chopper holding Barry's leg so he could shit in the Chopper batter. And then Steve put his foot down because that's taking it too far. Like the fucking golf ball that just shattered somebody's teeth. Wasn't fucking... That was oh no, this has gone too far. Oh my God, you guys are disgusting. As he's spitting into the fucking French curls.
Negative Element, Anti-Pac-Man.
Can you see what fun it is? Rocky smiles for him, got to play, got to win. He's the freedom message too. I got my games for who need you.
That whole 7-inch, I mean, it was just, is a landmark in itself, just because you didn't have to be so glum and bitter to be punk rock in Chicago.
Pac-Man was more important to us than Ronald Reagan at the time.
There's a band called Negative Element who were really sloppy and really messy and totally chaotic, and I liked them. The thing that was interesting was that at the same time that this sort of generic hardcore stuff started coming in, some of the freakiest fringe music was still being made. End Result, who were a brilliant band, absolutely brilliant, like completely deconstructed music, like music that could only have been made by them and that way. And they were playing at these hardcore shows.
The music was not hardcore in the sense of aggressive macho rock, but it was definitely avant-garde, brilliant, inspired, and insane.
And End Result always billed themselves as the most hardcore band in Chicago.
And they really were.
They were more hardcore than us. They didn't have a drummer.
Gotta find a way to Phil. Phil, going home. What do you need? What do you need? I don't need it. This is love. This is it.
Alan had played cello, so he tuned his guitar to the cello. Ron had played trumpet, but in the beginning we didn't use the trumpet. You know, Ron had played bass or guitar. And so we'd get in the basement and we'd say, well, we don't know what to do. You know, Alan knew what to do, but Ron and I, we don't know what to do. And he'd say, play something. And, okay, stop. Now play that again. Okay, that's a song. Next. You know, didn't Johnny Rotten say that, like, we're here to destroy rock and roll? So we took out most of the structure and the chords. So that to us it was punk rock. Maybe it wasn't punk rock, but it was definitely punk.
There was this sort of subclass of punk, the kiddie punk. 12-year-old kids are just banging and clanging, you know, and they're doing what people say kids do, the way, you know, adults tend to find it funny when babies dress up in adult clothes or wear daddy's shoes, you know, try to walk around in daddy's shoes, but that's all it is.
First guest today got together and formed a band. 4 young folks from Evanston. They call their group Verboten.
They're going to play an original song they wrote called My Opinion, and now here they are, Verboten.
Move my way. I'll follow you. Don't go away. You do what I do. Sudden setback. Don't tell me how to act.
Verboten's guitar player was like 6, I think, at the time they started playing. I don't remember exactly how old he was, but he was a little guy.
I got my first guitar when I was 9, and we were playing at Cubby Bear when I was 10, opening up for Naked Raygun and Rights of the Accused. Yeah, they were like 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds, and they were awesome. Musically, they were really, really good for how young they were.
He's looking for the key for the act of you and me. He's trying to get to the spot. Too bad he's a slum shot. He's a little touch, touch a lot. Too bad he's a slum shot. Little touch, touch a lot. Too bad he's a slum shot.
I had not yet gone through puberty. I was 10.
Basement Screams was his first 12-inch EP that Naked Raygun put out. I think it's 6 songs. Jim Kaleo on drums, Camilo on bass, myself and Sant, and then Haggerty played saxophone on a couple of songs.
I remember saying, you know what? I think it'll sound better if I lay down a track of guitar. And I remember Santiago saying, no, you're not gonna.
Put it out ourselves, pressed 2,000 copies, distributed it ourselves. Sold pretty decently, got some notoriety. Then just about then, Santiago, decided he was going to split the band. I'm not sure for what reason.
Yeah, because we would argue about, stuff. It's like, I don't want to play that shit, And then they would turn around and say, well, we don't want to play your shit, So I don't think they were really that upset, so.
At the time, we had John Haggerty, who played saxophone on the first record.
As a sax player, John was a really great guitarist. After Santiago decided to leave, he thought that the band would fall apart without him, and maybe it should have. But John stayed on and really took over the duties quite capably.
Haggerty's sound was just so solid and so huge and so always exactly the same.
Throb Throb was probably our biggest artistic achievement.
Because that record really reflects, 4 years even of songwriting from different members, from like maybe 6 members.
We kind of continued writing songs after Sant left in the same style that he had written them in. At least I did. He started this style, this whoa-whoa thing with some basic chords, and I just emulated it for as long as I could keep it going, basically. That's when people really started paying attention to us, just because it started to get more consistent and consistently good. We sounded good live then. the first time I met Steve Albini, and it was a bad incident. Steve Bjorklund and I were walking down the street, and Bjorklund was drunk, and we had just left Wax Trax Records, and Bjorklund was like, he would drink during the day and stuff. And he was shit-faced. And he came across Steve Albini. He goes, "Hey Steve, this is Jeff," and we met and shook hands and stuff. Then Bjorklund did this bad thing where he picked Albini up over his head like a professional wrestler. Picked him right up. Bjorklund was kind of a tough guy. Albini weighed about 75 pounds, you know. He picks Albini up and he loses his balance. And he falls on him on the sidewalk on his head. Bjorklund falls full on Albini, on the sidewalk in front of Wax Trax, on Albini's head.
Oh, mama.
Albini gets really hurt, you know, and I just met this guy. I'm like, what the hell is going on with this, you know? And Albini was really bruised up and stuff, and he said, "No, I'm okay, but I think he had like a slight concussion and everything too. He was really hurt. And then Bjorklund and I kind of walked off, and I said, "Wow, that was weird," you know?
Big Black started as a demo tape that I had made of these songs that I'd written after I got kicked out of this band's stations that I was in. I had given the demo tape to a bunch of people, basically saying, if you can think of anybody that would like this, that would play with me, you know, let me know. Jeff Pizzotti heard it, and he was kind of excited by it. He was like, "Man, I like that record. If you still need somebody to play with, I'll play with you."
So I said, "Steve, I could probably play bass, you know, even though I never have. I could probably figure out how to play it. It sounds pretty simple."
So Jeff and I started playing together, trying to put together a live version of the band, basically. It was him and me and a drum machine.
So then we started practicing in Naked's Raygun's practice space.
And about that point in the rehearsal, which was maybe 2 hours into it, Santiago came downstairs, and he was obviously frustrated. He'd been trying to watch a football game on this little portable television that he had in his bedroom, and he couldn't hear the football game.
And they were right below me, so I couldn't, you know, I was miserable. And so I sat there and I thought to myself, I can stay up here and fume and just, you know, get really aggravated, or I can do something fun and go downstairs and see if they'll let me play.
So he just came down and put on his guitar and he said, "Do you mind if I play with you? I'm not enjoying the football game upstairs." So like that, literally over the course of about an hour and a half, my two favorite musicians from my favorite band in the world were playing in a band with me. You know, that was a pretty gratifying afternoon.
Just really worked with me and Steve. It was a natural, you know, Steve, it's like a telepathic thing.
We were really well hated at the time in Chicago. No, because nobody liked Albini, and everybody used to ask me, "Why are you playing with that jerk?"
I was quite comfortable with the idea that we weren't a popular band, you know? That didn't bother me at all. Like, if the people that like, you know, Articles of Faith and Life Sentence, and if those kids don't like us, that's fine. The influence of hardcore on Chicago, I think, was a really bad one. New bands coming up suddenly had a template. Like, okay, we can sound like that. Like, we can sound like the Dead Kennedys, or we can sound like Minor Threat. And then it'll be preordained that we will be good.
I am untouched in my quest for
you know, everybody's conforming to a certain look and a certain attitude. It was kind of a bummer. I mean, you look out there at everything coming up, everybody of a certain age or a certain, you know, background or something, and they all kind of look the same, and they all kind of act the same, and they all kind of listen to the same music, and we start to think, wow, this is what I was getting away from before, you know.
And pretty soon things got bigger and bigger and bigger, and there were more people at shows. And I guess it would be kind of the same thing that we did to the Exit people. Like all of a sudden it wasn't our comfortable little deal anymore.
I think there was a lot more of the cliche punk attitude going on. And actually, at the time, we didn't consider ourselves to be punk. We considered ourselves to be hardcore. We drew a big difference between the two. And then when we started getting people who were coming into the hardcore scene who were punk, that's when we didn't like it.
Yeah, I blame that on the Quincy and Chips. Absolutely, you know. Because I didn't really know, you know, I didn't know many people who did that, you know, studded jacket and mohawk sort of thing, and I think those portrayals like brought that back, you know.
Younger, tougher, suburban, and they were out looking for a fight.
In the beginning, I think there were a lot of women in the pit because it was really chill. It was really mellow, you know. And by 83, 84, women stopped being able to be in it because it just became this big knucklehead slugfest, you know.
And then I felt sorry for the little girls that wanted to be the little punk girls, and they would try to jump in there, and it wasn't that friendly. Even the girls got hurt. As cool as they looked and as punk as they looked.
And it started to become a lot less fun. And I think that's when I stopped going to so many shows, you know. And by like, you know, 1985, I was like out of there.
Yeah, I think 1985 was when a lot of people decided to look around for other kinds of music.
But I would still go and like, you know, hang out on the side, and, you know, us like slightly older, you know, then the new kids would just bitch it about them, and it's look at them, oh, you know? They don't know, they got no idea, you know.
So you became like?
I became exactly what like I hated in the beginning.
We'd like to tell you about a really stupid radio station, Q101.
They say the Q stands for quality music. What a laugh. They don't play the Dead Boys. The Flesh Eaters.
The Germs. All you get is Fleetwood Mac.
Fogelberg. Best of the 60s.
James Taylor.
The Beatles.
Eagles.
Nothing.
Q101. The Q is for quality music.
They give you Let's Lynch the Landlord? Never.
See this book, the complete and thoroughly thorough history of punk rock, right? Okay, this should be interesting. There's nothing about Chicago. There was Steve Albini had like a few lines about him, and that was it.
We were just kind of off the map. I mean, there was no such thing as a Chicago scene that was recognized nationally.
Midwest is a bunch of hicks, you know, so I think that's what the attitude sort of like the entertainment industry is, you know.
There wasn't enough people who recorded. There wasn't enough people who got signed. I mean, I can name the bands that got signed on one hand, you know.
I think if one band had kind of made it a little bit, it would have, you know, fueled the whole scene, and it would have, you know, but it just did, you know, when it doesn't happen, nothing happens.
You know, Chicago always was like the redheaded stepchild, you know.
I had people tell me that they thought this was going to turn into something. This is going to change the world. Like, you're nuts. It's not going to change the world. I might change music. I was ready to, and I wasn't even sure about that. I thought, you know, we'd do our thing, we'd be around for a while, it would be forgotten, everything would go back to the way it was prior to us showing up.
Somebody wrote a book, I think it was a Boy George biography. I don't care about Boy George, but the title was great. It's called As If Punk Never Happened. And that's exactly where we are now.
I mean, it's kind of like classic rock now. You know, it's like I'll walk into like some store and some kid will have a mohawk and a leather jacket. And it's like, oh, it's retro. You know.
Nowadays, it's fairly ubiquitous. You can't really get away from punk or people who think they know punk.
They have more tattoos, more piercings, and they know what the uniform is all about. You know, in the old days, People did whatever they wanted to do, but now it's like everybody's got a pretty good idea of what you should do if you want to be into it, you know.
Once it became like a generic look, I kind of felt like anybody adopting that was, you know, fair game. Like, okay, you're an idiot, you know. So now when I see if I see somebody reviving that look, I don't get all warm and fuzzy, you know. It's like somebody reviving the Nixon administration or something, you know. It's an ugly memory.
My impression of the ones that I see, the ones that I've talked to that are really, really out there, I don't think they're all that bright.
I've met so many racist, sexist, just downright closed-minded people dressed up like that. That, you know, it's fashion, you know, fashion.
Literally, I see Minor Threat t-shirts from kids who weren't born when Minor Threat broke up. What do I think? Get your own fucking scene.
Do your own thing, you know. I'm not supposed to like what you do. I'm almost 50 years old. You should be doing something that's going to really annoy the shit out of me. And you're failing because, you know, I like punk rock, so, you know, you've failed.
Are there punk rockers today? There's people that look like punk rockers today.
They
but
sound like punk
you know,
rockers.
it's the equivalent of me putting on a tie-dyed shirt and hippie beads and growing my hair and, hey, I'm a hippie. Well, it's dead and gone. I mean, get your own movement.
But then again, I don't think it's fair to blame people for their age. I mean, you can't help when you're born. And if you want to make a certain kind of noise, you know, I mean, I suppose you could second guess people's motivation all day long. That's not something I'm terribly interested in doing. I mean, I'd rather second guess my own.
There's still a lot of good punk bands, a lot of good bands out there playing good hardcore music. It just doesn't have the same feeling, the same anger, the same energy that was back in the old day.
It's like bands were then, but not as good. You know, and there's not the immediacy or the conviction.
But they don't seem to be as into it as we were. It seems to be a lot more boredom going on. I've been to a few punk shows recently, and they just kind of stand around.
The punk rock in the late 70s and early 80s, there was a lot of irony and sarcasm, and I think some of that is kind of lost now.
They got the chords, they got, you know, the beat, they just don't have the spirit, they just don't understand it. It's been codified and turned into like this mainstream mall culture, you know, just another way to advertise, you know, tennis shoes and stuff, and it's really, really sad.
The bands I used to go see that I really worshipped, like, they didn't make any money. Like, they were doing it because it was a cool thing to do and because there was nothing else to do and because they wanted to. Whereas now you can, you know, have a mohawk and be on MTV and have a big record.
If you have a tour bus, if you have deli trays and all red M&Ms, that's not punk rock.
The music that passes for punk now, or the music that's called punk sort of stylistically now, is populist music. It's, you know, it's for jocks and cheerleaders and, you know, kids on the pep club or whatever. You know, and those are the people that like that kind of music now. That's who it's made for. And you know, they're the enemy.
They don't back it up. They don't back it up musically, and they don't back it up with attitude. It's the song content, it's the lyric content. You know, they're singing about being mad about some girl in Southern California. That's not what punk's about, you know. Punk's about being pissed off at the general condition, you know.
A lot of them are doing the same old fucking shit, you know, and
Yeah,
you know,
I've only
whatever.
heard things that, you know, this new stuff. I'm going, I don't know. I heard 10 bands like that 20 years ago. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's what you
Just
consider punk
not that
anymore
interested.
nowadays. I mean, punk is mainstream almost.
Yeah.
If you can sell it, it doesn't hold the same weight, you know. But that's inevitable as far as I'm concerned. You know, you can't stop that, and you shouldn't stop it. You know, underground music goes through what it goes through, and then it's over.
There was like a, you know, the rage towards Reaganism and all that. There was a movement, and even though politics are totally fucked up right now, and it's just there for the taking. I don't see it, you know. It's like, you know, Green Day's pissed at Bush, you know. Oh, you know, it's just different. It's just a different time.
We were all angry. I wonder what happened to all the anger. It seems people are very happy with the way things are right now, and I don't understand it, because I mean, right now, it's worse than ever.
And as long as their material needs and wants are being satisfied, they don't care. They're not going to get angry about much.
And they just like this comfort zone that they have right now, because what's masquerading as punk is more commercial and politically correct than anything we ever did.
I don't know, what is punk rock these days?
I think people today are getting into other kinds of music if they really want adventurous music. Because I think there is adventurous stuff out there, and I think it's not necessarily punk rock.
You know, I've got great hope in the kids, and I hope they, you know, do manage to be able to come up with new and creative ways of expressing themselves. It may not be the same as the punk rock we knew in '77, '78, but something that embodies that same kind of spirit of, you know, rebellion and experimentation.
Let me like deal with what I put my parents through. Do it, you know? Freak me out. Cool. I'll be proud of you.
I'll tell you one thing about the suburbs. Once we got this whole punk rock thing settled in the suburbs, it's never going to leave. It'll take 1,000 years to leave the suburbs, and that's where it's stuck now, and that's where it's going to stay for hundreds of years past my death and everything. It's the world's greatest thing, that punk rock is it's settled into the suburbs. You can't get it to leave now. They'll have to root it out by its ankles and pull it out by the roots, you know? Because once the suburbs glom onto something, like, you know, bad heavy metal or whatever, it takes forever to get it out of there. It's still there. This punk rock thing is in there. It's where it's settled down into. And bands are just going to keep coming out of the suburbs doing that forever now, for as long as you and I are alive.